Forget the color coordination stories. Forget the curtsy debates. Forget every outlet calling this a wardrobe rivalry between two women who happen to share a favorite shade of blue, because in January 2026, the Times of London published something that every royal channel in this space reported as a feel-good profile piece, and then moved on from without asking the single most important question sitting inside it. The article was headlined, "Arise, Queen Kate." It ran in the Times magazine, the color supplement inside Britain's most authoritative newspaper, and the friends and palace insiders who gave interviews for it described Catherine as ambitious, bold, and determined to deliver what they called impactful change when she becomes queen. That is not a puff piece. That is a declaration of intent, and the woman who was sitting on the throne when it was published understood it as exactly that. This is not a story about fashion. This is a story about institutional positioning, about which woman inside that palace currently holds the real operational leverage, and about the specific mechanism by which a sitting queen finds herself being publicly replaced before the king is even gone. That is not gossip. That is palace politics with a paper trail. Give me 80 seconds before you click away, because what this channel covers is not the version of this story that anyone else is telling. Other channels are asking which woman wore blue more effectively, which got better positioning in the carriage photograph, which one curtsied first. Those are fine questions if you want to spend your time watching royal fashion commentary. The question worth asking is different, and by the time we reach Revelation 4, you will understand why a single Times Magazine headline in January 2026 represents something far more structurally significant than anyone in mainstream coverage has been willing to say out loud. 5 revelations, each more damaging to the current power arrangement than the one before it. And by the end of this video, you will understand the mechanics of the Catherine-Camilla dynamic better than 99% of the journalists who have been filing color pieces about it for 2 years. Stay with me. The question of why this story matters right now has a specific answer, and it sits inside a medical bulletin that the palace released in December 2025. That bulletin confirmed that King Charles III is reducing cancer treatment in 2026, and it made a careful distinction that the mainstream coverage largely glossed over. His cancer is not in remission. Treatment is being reduced. The disease is not gone. And the palace's own briefings, according to multiple named sources, including royal insider Tom Sykes writing for the Daily Beast, describe the king's condition as precarious, with succession planning already underway at a pace that sources say is faster than anyone publicly acknowledges. A senior courtier told Rob Shooter's Shooter Scoop in early 2026 that the palace is, and this is a direct quote, quietly preparing William to step up fast, adding that the illusion of perfect health is collapsing. Now hold that framing. The illusion of perfect health is collapsing because in that specific context, a king reducing treatment, a palace quietly accelerating succession planning, and an heir being fast-tracked toward responsibilities that would not normally arrive for years. The January 2026 Times Magazine profile of Catherine lands in a completely different register than a simple celebration of a popular princess. Statement A. The palace has consistently maintained that King Charles remains an active and engaged sovereign, with no plans for abdication or formal transfer of powers, and that the existing chain of command within the royal household remains intact. Record B. January 2026, with Charles's cancer treatment being reduced but not resolved, a senior courtier on record describing accelerated succession planning, and the Times Magazine, Britain's newspaper of record, running a cover story headlined "Arise, Queen Kate," featuring palace insiders describing her future reign in present tense, as if the transition is not a distant prospect but an active project already in motion. The math fails. That is not a coincidence of timing. That is institutional signaling. And the woman it was signaling past is Queen Camilla, who was at that moment still carrying out her duties as the sitting queen, patron of over 100 charities, and the most senior woman in the royal household. Before the 5 revelations, one thing quickly. This channel has under 30 subscribers, and that number is not a rhetorical flourish, it is accurate. There are fewer than 10 people subscribed to this channel right now, and there are no sponsors, no PR relationships, and nobody in the royal media ecosystem advising me on which angles are safe to take and which ones need to stay off camera. Next week, this channel is going somewhere nobody in this space wants to go, which is a detailed examination of what King Charles's cancer status actually means for the constitutional mechanics of the succession, and specifically what happens to Camilla's position, her funding, and her institutional role under a regency scenario that the palace has never publicly acknowledged, but that multiple named sources suggest is being planned for. That video will not stay up for long, so subscribe now to make sure you see it. And now, back to the case file. Revelation 1. The headline that wasn't an accident. January 2026, and the Times Magazine publishes a profile of Catherine, Princess of Wales, under the headline, Arise, Queen Kate, with the online version running the line, Kate will be a queen who really listens, by Palace insiders. The feature described Catherine as ambitious, bold, and keen to deliver impactful change, with interviews from people described as close long-term friends and palace insiders. One contributor, podcast host Giovanna Fletcher, who had Catherine as a guest in 2020, told The Times that Catherine will be a queen who really listens, who leans in, who's very aware of what's going on, and predicted a welcome change for the institution. Now, the palace did not sanction that headline. The Times Magazine controls its own headlines, and Kensington Palace's press operation would not have approved the words Arise, Queen Kate, as official messaging while Queen Camilla is still in post. But what Daily Mail columnist Amanda Platell immediately raised in her response is the question that matters here. Did the Princess of Wales or her office approve the interviews themselves? Platell wrote directly, did those close long-term friends of William and Kate have their approval to talk? Did Kate and William, in fact, sanction this article about her intentions when she becomes queen? We may never know. Statement A. Kensington Palace's standard position is that they do not comment on or control coverage produced by third-party publications, and that unnamed friends speaking to journalists do so independently. Record B. January 2026, with Charles's cancer not in remission and succession planning actively underway, Palace insiders, described specifically as Palace insiders, not just friends, gave on-record interviews to Britain's most authoritative newspaper describing Catherine's future reign in terms that positioned her as already filling the institutional space currently occupied by a living, working queen. Not one of those insider contributors was named. Not one. Think about that. The Daily Beast's Royalist column ran its response under the headline, Queen Kate angers jealous Charles, describing the profile as having sharpened royal rivalries and highlighting what it called an awkward reality for the palace. Kate now outshines Camilla by a country mile. That is not fashion commentary. That is an institutional audit, delivered in magazine format. And here is where it gets worse. Because the Times Magazine profile is not an isolated event. It is the most visible point of a pattern that had been building for months before January 2026. Revelation 2. The pattern that proves it is not accidental. The specific incident that royal sources identify as the trigger point for what magazine described as open warfare between Catherine and Camilla did not happen in a palace. It happened at a state banquet, in front of cameras, with witnesses. During the Trump state visit to Britain, royal watchers reported that Camilla appeared to shoo Catherine away during a conversation with Melania Trump, a gesture multiple sources contested, but that landed publicly as a display of hierarchy being enforced. Then, at the banquet itself, the dynamic inverted. Trump directed his attention and conversation toward Catherine. A guest told journalists, Trump directed most of his conversation toward Kate. She came across as polished, confident, completely natural. The contrast with Camilla was clear, and she was aware of it. One event does not make a structural shift. What makes a structural shift is what a senior royal source told Radar Online when Catherine returned from cancer treatment in late 2024. What's happening now feels like the fiercest clash we've seen between two senior royal women in years. Camilla feels sidelined, while Kate's growing confidence and visibility are unsettling her. A palace aide added separately, Camilla dislikes being eclipsed. Kate's growing authority carries a queenly air, and it is creating tensions. Statement A. The palace publicly presents the relationship between Queen Camilla and the Princess of Wales as warm, collaborative, and without friction. Ramcord B. Multiple named journalists and on-record palace sources across late 2024 and into 2026 document a dynamic described as open warfare, with Camilla panicked by Catherine's visibility and palace sources confirming the tension has become almost impossible to contain. It's becoming a bit of an Olympic sport at this point. The distance between the palace's public position and what its own people are telling journalists. And that gap has a history going back to the year Catherine first walked through the palace gates. Revelation 3. The name they asked her to change. Royal biographer Christopher Anderson, author of the book, Kate, The Courage, Grace, and Power of the Woman Who Will Be Queen, published in 2026, documents a specific incident from the period before Catherine's 2011 wedding to Prince William that has not been previously corroborated in print with this level of detail. According to Anderson, who has published multiple royal biographies without facing a defamation action, the then Prince Charles and Camilla, Duchess of Cornwall, made a formal request that Catherine change the spelling of her first name before the wedding. Specifically, they asked her to become Catherine rather than Catherine because Charles and Camilla's royal monogram used the interlocking initials C and C, and a second Catherine in the royal household was seen as creating a conflict of identity and monogram overlap. Let me put this plainly. The future king and the future queen asked the woman who would eventually replace them both to change her name. Before she had even entered the institution, Prince William, when he became aware of the request, described it to his father as insulting, not only to Catherine but to her entire family. The request was dropped. Catherine remained Catherine. Nothing in Anderson's account has been officially confirmed or denied by Buckingham Palace or Kensington Palace. The palace does not comment on such books, but the specific detail sits in a biography by a named author, corroborated in structural terms by a parallel claim in Prince Harry's own memoir Spare, where Harry made reference to early tensions around Catherine's entry into the family, and it adds a piece of documented institutional context that changes the texture of everything that followed. Because the woman who was asked to change her name before her wedding is now the woman whose future reign is being celebrated in the Times magazine, while the woman who made that request is still sitting on the throne. Think about that. And here is the mechanism by which that reversal is now playing out in the institution's actual power structure, which is what Revelation 4 is about. Revelation 4, the institutional mechanism. Camilla cannot stop. Royal sources, named palace insiders, and multiple published accounts in late 2025 and early 2026 converge on a single structural reality. William is, in the words of one palace source, already king unofficially. That is not hyperbole. It reflects a documented institutional shift building since Charles's cancer diagnosis in February 2024 and accelerating through 2025. William attended COP30 in Belém, Brazil in November 2025, representing his father. He and Catherine were formally appointed as royal warrant grantors in 2026. A 5-year appointment that royal correspondent coverage described as signaling a shift from supporting players to primary decision-makers. King Charles reportedly moved in early 2026 to fast-track Catherine's role specifically. As the succession timeline became less theoretical, here is the constitutional reality sitting behind all of that. Under the Regency Act 1953, if the sovereign becomes incapacitated, a regent is appointed to exercise royal functions. That regent would be Prince William, and a regent exercising sovereign functions is not a supporting cast member. A regent is, for all institutional purposes, the functional sovereign. Under that scenario, Camilla's position changes materially. Her funding, her patronages, her institutional authority, and her public role are all tied to her relationship with the sovereign. A regent is not the sovereign. The protections that flow from being the king's wife become structurally complex under a regency, and the palace has never publicly addressed what Camilla's role looks like under that framework. Statement A. The palace has stated Charles remains the active sovereign, that no abdication is planned, and that a regency does not currently arise. Rempart B. Charles's cancer is ongoing and not in remission. Palace sources on record describe accelerated succession planning. William is stepping into constitutional roles historically reserved for the sovereign, and the Regency Act 1953 provides the legal framework for formalizing his authority without any public announcement until the moment it becomes necessary. That is not a theory. That is statute law and a documented pattern of institutional preparation. And the person who built 30 years of patronage networks and media relationships inside that institution is the one person that legal framework does not protect. Revelation 5. The financial reality of Camilla's position here is the number that nobody is discussing alongside the palace power dynamic story. Under the Sovereign Grant Act 2011, which governs the funding of the royal household, Queen Camilla does not receive a separate annuity. Her activities are funded entirely from the sovereign grant, the public money allocated to the sovereign to fund the official work of the monarchy. According to the House of Commons Library Research Briefing published in December 2025, the sovereign grant is expected to rise to £137.9 million in 2026 and 2027. That is the pool from which Camilla's staff, her official travel, her patronage infrastructure, and her operational costs are all drawn. The critical detail is this: that funding flows because of her relationship to the sovereign. It is not a personal settlement. It is not a fixed arrangement independent of the institutional structure. It is sovereign grant money, meaning it flows at the discretion of how the institution allocates its resources, and the institution's resource allocation is ultimately accountable to the royal trustees and to Parliament. Now put that alongside the documented reality of what is happening to Camilla's institutional position. A source close to the situation told reporters that when William becomes king, Camilla will effectively be at Kate's mercy in terms of her perks and influence within the firm. That is a named royal source using the word mercy, not as a metaphor, but as a precise description of the dependency structure that would exist. If Catherine becomes queen and William becomes king, Camilla's access to sovereign grant resources, her official housing, her staffing, and her institutional role are all subject to decisions made by the new sovereign and his household. There is no legal instrument that guarantees her current resource base independent of the institutional relationship that produces it. Statement A. Camilla is Queen of the United Kingdom, patron of over 100 charities, a senior working royal, and a figure whose institutional position is secure for the duration of Charles's reign. Re-undered B. Her entire financial and institutional infrastructure is funded through the sovereign grant, with no independent settlement, is allocated at the discretion of the sovereign's household, and is subject to complete restructuring the moment the sovereign changes, with named palace sources on record describing the future power relationship between Camilla and Catherine in terms of dependency rather than security. The math fails. Again, let me slow down for a moment, because underneath all the institutional mechanics and the constitutional frameworks and the magazine headlines, there is a human story that the coverage keeps skating past. Valentine Lowe, a royal expert speaking to GB News in early 2026, said something that I think is genuinely worth sitting with. He noted that Catherine and Camilla are very different people. His words were, "Kate is very controlled and cautious and careful. Camilla is much more outgoing. Camilla Parker Bowles spent decades being one of the most vilified women in Britain." Princess Diana called her the Rottweiler. Royal biographer Christopher Anderson told Fox News Digital that Camilla was Princess Diana's hated arch-nemesis, and that millions of people resented her for years, to the point where she chose not to use the Princess of Wales title when she became entitled to it, because doing so would have been, in his words, rubbing their noses in it. She built a rehabilitation slowly, through consistency, through charity work, through public appearances, through the gradual softening of public opinion that came with time. Royal author Tom Quinn, who interviewed hundreds of palace staff members for his 2025 book Yes Ma'am, documented that Camilla herself once hated the idea of being queen and found royal protocol suffocating. resisting its demands in ways that staff described in surprisingly candid terms. She eventually accepted it. She was crowned alongside Charles at Westminster Abbey in May 2023, and she wore the crown of Queen Mary. And the woman who was asked to change her name before her own wedding, who spent a year managing a cancer diagnosis, who returned to her duties and immediately began outshining the sitting queen at state occasions, is now the woman whose palace insiders are giving interviews to the Times magazine about the kind of queen she intends to be. Camilla has been in this institution long enough to understand exactly what that means. That is not strategy. That is grief in a very specific register, the grief of watching something you spent a lifetime building be quietly made redundant while you are still standing inside it. And no amount of palace messaging changes what that moment actually feels like. Here is the verdict. Camilla is, by any fair assessment, a genuinely effective queen consort. She has built a patronage network of over 100 organizations, done consistent charity work in areas that powerful people routinely avoid: domestic violence, literacy, veteran welfare, animal welfare, without generating public crises for the institution. That record is real and deserves to be stated honestly. And this year, the institutional momentum around her position made a mistake. Not because Catherine is more popular, not because the Times magazine published a flattering profile, not because Camilla made a visible error at the Trump banquet. The mistake was structural and was made long before any of this became visible. Nobody inside the institution designed a transition architecture that gives Camilla a dignified and protected role on the other side of the succession. Her entire institutional position, her funding, her authority, her patronage infrastructure, is built on a relationship to the sovereign that ends the moment the sovereign changes, and the silence around what comes after is the single most consequential gap in the palace's current planning. Here is the question I want you to sit with, because I genuinely want your answer in the comments, and I don't think anyone covering this story has given a satisfying answer to it yet. The palace spent years managing the transition from Diana's memory to Camilla's rehabilitation, and they did it carefully enough that public opinion shifted substantially over time. So why, with a succession that appears to be moving faster than anyone publicly acknowledges, has nobody inside that institution designed a framework that gives Camilla a defined and protected role after William becomes king? Is it that they believe Charles will outlast the urgency? Is it that Catherine's operation is already making decisions that a future queen doesn't technically have the authority to make yet? Or is the silence itself the answer? Is the absence of a plan for Camilla the plan? That is the question. Drop your answer below, because I don't think anyone has cracked it yet. This story is not over, and it is not resolved by a magazine headline or a carriage photograph or a curtsy at a state visit. The next chapter starts inside the Regency Act and the sovereign grant allocation process, because those are the two legal documents that will determine what Camilla's life actually looks like when the transition the palace is quietly preparing for finally arrives. The clock on that is running, and the palace has not said a word about what happens to the queen when the king is gone.